Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today we're joined by Pierre Dubosc, managing director of Semantiweb North America. Before joining Semantiweb 7 years ago, Pierre worked client-side first as a brand manager and then moved into consumer insights, which opened up the opportunity to conduct both traditional and quantitative and qualitative market research. Thanks for joining us on the show, Pierre.
Thanks a lot for having me, Michael, and thrilled to be here.
You're quite welcome. So what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today, Pierre?
Well, some of our insights, most valuable insights and contributions to our clients come when we actually do not take things for granted and keep an open-minded mindset when we're open to change, to new possibilities. And I actually love my job because I get to work for so many different clients in different industries. And of course, their knowledge is invaluable. They know they have an incredible expertise about their brands, products, industries. They know their market much better than I will ever do. But as a consumer insight specialist, my role is also to bring them the perspective of their end users, their consumers who use their brands and products. And sometimes there is a gap actually between what we think we know about our consumers and the reality of these consumers. So it's actually magical to be the voice of consumers. And depending on the cases, we can confirm our clients' intuitions or embody KPIs they follow every day with actual examples of consumer behaviors from real life. And sometimes also we get to come up with surprising findings.
So, question for you then, is an insight an insight if it's already been discovered by someone?
So sometimes an insight is just to put things that are right in front of you back into perspective. And sometimes consumers are about very basic things, but it's always good to put these things into perspective. And consumers may not always be after fancy new innovations. Sometimes it's really about going back to the basics.
No, for sure. So I guess doing things the way that we've always done them doesn't necessarily guarantee we'll keep discovering new and interesting things as well in the future. That statement that you made in the introduction, it sounded like there's a little bit of a story buried in there somewhere. Do you mind sharing what that was?
Oh, of course. So when I was on the brand side, one of the most incredible and eye-opening experiences from that time, and a very humbling one too, when I got to spend a few days with our consumers in their homes. We got to talk about our products and services, of course, but what was really striking is we mostly talked about who they were and their daily lives. So we got to talk about their families, their passions, their health, their fears in life. And it was just incredible because I realized that talking about brands is just a tiny portion of what our consumers' lives are. And when you think about it, I don't talk about brands all the time. If I look at everything I say in a given day, I may mention like 2 or 3 different brands, but I say a lot of other things. So this is what it's all about, to capture this conversation that really help us understand who our consumers are. And before going to these meetings at our clients' homes, I had read tons and tons of quantitative or qualitative reports. So I was pretty sure I knew my clients. And I went to these meetings probably with a lot of preconceived ideas. So for me, it was like a huge slap in the face. I only had a very partial understanding of our clients and probably a very biased perspective. So for me, I realized you just cannot reduce consumers' behaviors to just a few questions about your category, your brands, your products. You have to have that big picture. So for me, that was like an eye-opening experience. But I also realized, unfortunately, I couldn't spend my days at our client's home, and this type of methodologies was quite time consuming and also not cheap. But at some point I realized, interesting, because consumers say so much online on blogs, forums. It's like actually the information is already out there. It's just how do you aggregate and structure this unstructured data. So it was like discovering a new El Dorado of data. It just had to be organized in a proper and relevant way. And so this is at the time that I discovered Semantiweb and when I decided to join it.
Oh, cool. So there's obviously a role for diaries and being physically present, witnessing the lives of consumers, etc. I'd be interested to know what the catalyst was for that change. What made you reimagine your approach to market research?
So I started working in marketing in the early 2000s, so about 20 years ago. And fun fact, I remember one of my first media training actually was with our media agency. And at the time, we started to talk about investing on online channels. So the question came up, of course, and I remember the coach who was from our media agency said, yeah, online is interesting, but it's never going to be a big thing. So it can make you smile now, but it's not such a long time ago. So it's also a valuable lesson. Don't assume things are set in stone and always keep an open mind. We're coming back to this. And of course, after a few years, I realized digital marketing is a key aspect of the marketing mix. There is no question about it. But at first, I also found it a bit overwhelming because there are so many new different platforms every day. You have to follow new metrics too. It also involves new ways of working. So it can be a bit intimidating and challenging. So for me, what helped to navigate this very fast-moving environment was to actually go back to the basics and put consumers at the center of all my decisions and all our actions. So once again, this may sound like common sense, but I also have a lot of examples from my team or agencies or coworkers who would tell me, oh, we need to do this or that because our competitor does this, or this looks cool, or there's this trending hashtag, trending topic. We need to move fast. But if you keep doing this, you also lose your sense of purpose. And as a brand, you also need to have like a strong sense of purpose and keep that direction. So for me, keeping our consumers in mind and at the core, at the center of all our decisions, what really helped. And this helped me bring some clarity in our strategy to this chaotic world. And so I realized I loved to do this, and that finding a real different consumer insight is not that easy. It's a really long and difficult process. And I love doing it because it's a mix of quant and qual analysis. You have to really challenge what you already know. You have to also share it with different people, make sure it makes sense, see how unique it is. And so I slowly transitioned to more focused consumer insights roles. And for me, it's like a constant source of fun.
Yeah, nice. So Semantiweb does a lot of its work on as you said, blogs, social networks, etc. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Because one thing that it's quite interesting is it's quite reductive here, but you've got almost two types of user on social media. For instance, you've got your active engagers, which will be posting, creating content, commenting, etc., and then you've just got your viewers, your consumers that just are scrolling throughout the day. So you've almost got an aspect of listening that you have to do, so what people are saying, but then also observing at the same time as well. So what people are doing on their devices, what they're just visually engaging with. So that poses a little bit of a challenge too, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so our expertise is really in the first part, in understanding what consumers say online. So the first thing is, we do not ask questions. We work on spontaneous conversations that are on blogs, forums, social networks, and also online reviews. And basically, we collect this data, we structure it, and then we analyze it, both qualitatively and quantitatively. We have algorithms, but the human aspect for me is key, because we're talking about human behavior mostly. That's the most important part. So coming back to the sources, I would say there are three main types of sources. So there are first blogs and forums, where consumers share anonymous conversations with other like-minded people who share the same interests, pain points, or passions or values. But these conversations are anonymous. Then we have social networks, where you are more likely to interact with people you already know or admire. So your friends, your family members, coworkers. And the third type of source is online reviews, where you leave your experience with a specific product. So each type of source has its specificities. So to give you a concrete example, it's a bit of a caricature, but it's actually like based on true findings. So let's imagine a bride who talks about her hair color before she gets married. She will say different things depending on the platform. So for example, she will turn to blogs and forums to say that she really needs to find a hair dye that will cover her gray roots and help her have natural looking hair for her big D day. On social media, she's more likely to post a photo or a video about her wedding day and say it was like an amazing day and thank her friends and family members for being here for her. And on online review platforms, she may post a very detailed review explaining that this product was actually a lifesaver for her, that it was able to quickly cover her gray roots while also looking natural, have healthy looking hair with great natural shine, for example. So for us, all these types of sources are super interesting and insightful, and it's interesting to put them in perspective, because as a brand, it helps you understand what's the pain point you need to solve, how to communicate it in a very engaging way, and what are the key attributes to also communicate to make sense for this consumer. So of course, this is just one example, but when you aggregate it to hundreds, thousands, or millions of consumers, you get a very interesting picture of each step of the consumer decision journey.
No, sure. So do you have any frameworks or principles that span across these in terms of how you operate?
So yes, definitely. So Semantiweb was created 12 years ago. And actually, what's interesting is, since the beginning, we've had 4 key principles that are still at the core of our methodology today. So the first one is that it's interesting to analyze online conversations, but these conversations are much more insightful if you actually understand who the web users behind these conversations are. The second conversation is, of course, you need to understand what is said about your brands and products, but consumers have so much more to say than just talk about your brands, because they love to talk about their daily lives, passions, pain points. To give you a concrete example, when we analyze a topic, usually only 5 to 20% of conversations actually mention a specific brand. So these are interesting, but it's not the bulk of the conversations. The third key principle is that real-time monitoring is key to engage with your consumers. But we're also talking about consumer behaviors, and this requires to take a step back to analyze and understand long-term trends, evolutions, and behaviors. And finally, our fourth principle is that AI, algorithms, machine learning are key to do our job, especially when it comes to big data. But we're talking about human sciences, so we're convinced that we definitely need and will always need some human analysis to unveil this consumer insight that will eventually make a difference in our consumers' lives.
Yeah, sure. So what ways are you seeking to understand who web users are? What data sources are you combining to build up such profiles?
So we're collecting data from blogs, from social media, Instagram, TikTok, as well as online reviews. And for example, when we analyze, let's say, a topic like baby food, okay, we'll look for conversations about baby food. So we'll create what we call a sample of conversations. Usually a sample means hundreds of thousands of conversations, so it's a pretty big sample. And then we'll look at who the web users behind these conversations are. So somebody who talked about breastfeeding, for example, will also talk about plenty of other things. So we look at these other conversations. We do it, of course, anonymously, and we're compliant with all the data regulations. But to give you a concrete example, a person talking about breastfeeding may say that she is lactose intolerant, that she usually goes shopping in organic stores, that she's vegan, that she loves yoga, for example. Each of these conversations is interesting to help us understand who this web user is. So we'll actually identify keywords, expressions that will help us qualify this web user. So for example, if she says that she follows a vegan diet, we'll tag her as vegan. We'll tag her as shopping in organic stores, as a yoga addict. So that when we aggregate all these web users who talk about breastfeeding, we can tell, for example, that 30% of them are vegan. And we know that compared to the rest of the population is much more than the average. So this is how we turn unstructured data into actual consumer knowledge.
Yeah, very cool. Do you have to treat any of the sources differently from one another, or are they relatively similar in nature?
No, we do treat them separately because, once again, you won't tell the same thing the same way depending on where you're talking. So, for example, when we analyze a topic, we know that most volumes come from social networks. At least 80%, more than 8 conversations out of 10 will come from social networks. So if you just look at these social networks, you know, everybody's life is perfect, basically, to make it short. It's actually not the case, and it's important to keep that potential bias in mind. Also, on social networks, especially on Instagram, you're more likely to tag brands because you want to capture their audience, or also like show your daily life in a very glamorous way. It's not always the case, of course, but it's kind of the reality for a lot of our consumers. On the opposite side, blogs and forums are really interesting to understand, okay, what's preventing these consumers to live that glamorous life? So coming back to the example of like the wedding days, oh my God, I have these terrible acne pimples. What can I do? Because right now it's destroying my self-confidence. I don't want to feel awful on my wedding day. So volumes may not be as high as social media, but these conversations are crucial to really understand the big picture. And then online reviews may be very focused on products attributes. So it's also interesting to try to understand the profile of the web users behind these online reviews. But each type of source is insightful, and we always try to combine them in our analysis. And sometimes we will look specifically at one type of source. If a client asks us to engage with their clients, current users, it can be, of course, interesting to look at TikTok or Instagram and really see, okay, what makes clients engage, interact with brands? What are the most frequently asked questions? What makes them talk about the brand in a positive way? What do they don't like or like, etc., etc.
Well, cool. So you've mentioned before, and I've seen this in some of your content, that consumers love talking about their daily lives, passions, and pain points. Is this something that you see maintaining, or is it trending up or down?
So definitely, when you look at what's happened in the last few years, this trend is going up for sure. We see more and more consumers talk online in terms of profiles. Now we also have older web users, we have very young users. What's interesting also, you see different types of profiles, different experts talk online. Now we're able to look at key opinion leaders, KOLs. We are able to track the conversations of specific profiles, such as doctors, derms, hairstylists, nurses, dentists, etc., etc. The second thing is, not only do they talk more, they also share more and more detailed testimonials of their lives and their experiences. So that's also something super interesting. For example, when we look at online reviews, a couple of years ago, a review for, let's say, a toothpaste was maybe 20 to 30 words long. If we look at those reviews today, sometimes they're 100 words long, and we have so much data to analyze. It's super insightful. So definitely we see like this combination of factors. For me, the trend is definitely going up.
And any differences between organic versus incentivized commentary?
So what we do is we analyze spontaneous conversations. So usually when we analyze a topic, we do not analyze sponsored content. We can, and if we do, we will analyze that separately, because definitely that's a bias in consumers' behaviors. But once again, it's all about, understanding, who our consumers really are in their daily lives when they are not talking about your products or your brands.
That's right. Okay.
And I'm not saying these conversations are not interesting, and we do analyze them. It's just, it's much more insightful if you have a big picture, once again.
No, I agree. That's great. So how then do you balance real-time monitoring with more considered consumer analysis? It must be quite hard to strike that balance between the short-term and then the medium and long-term understanding that you generate, especially, I guess, if you uncover what you uncover in the real time is at odds with what you're seeing in trends.
Actually, not really, because we do not really analyze real-time conversations. What we mostly analyze is, long-term trends, and we always try to analyze broad periods of time. So I would say this is the main difference between what we call e-reputation and social listening. So by e-reputation, I mean, tool that help you capture in real time what is being said about your brand. And it's definitely super important to manage potential crises or deal with potential crises and engage with your followers in a timely manner by leveraging trending topics, trending hashtags, for example.
Yeah.
When it comes to consumers' behaviors, of course, these conversations also are interesting, but we also make sure to take a step back to put things into perspective and identify patterns within consumers' behaviors. Because actually, consumers' behaviors do not change as often as trending topics, for example. There's some continuity, and we're trying to highlight that continuity in our consumers' behaviors. So to give you a concrete example, I can give you an example from beauty, from the hair color category, once again. This is a category we actually know pretty well, so we have a lot of insights from that category. And I'm sorry, I personally don't use hair color products, but and I should, because I have, well, gray hair, but that's actually also what's super interesting, because I do not have the personal experience of the products, and our clients have this expertise, but this doesn't mean we're not able to really understand the consumers who use or could use these products. And actually, this is also what helps us have this open mind. And sometimes actually it's just super valuable to tell clients, okay, actually you're talking to your end users as if they knew your products by heart. They actually don't understand anything. They don't know how to navigate the category. This may seem like very basic, but actually this can be valuable for a brand, because there's a gap here that can be breached by a brand that will actually talk to clients in a more educational way and more simple way. But so coming back to the example of the hair color category, if you look at real-time conversations, there will be new trending topics, trending hashtags every day. So as a brand, you will hear hashtag mermaid hair, hashtag rainbow hair, hashtag Gemini hair, hashtag Lacroix hair, hashtag Cyril hair, etc., etc. All these examples are real examples. As a brand, does it mean you have to launch a new product and invest millions in each of these hashtags? I'm not sure, because that's interesting to engage and really leverage some short-term trends. But as a brand, of course, you need to adjust your brand content creation, but to really guide the whole brand strategy in terms of innovation, targeting, loyalty, etc., etc., this is where social listening is super important, because you will get to analyze conversations about temporary hair color over a very long period of time, sometimes years of data. We can go back up to 10 years in time. So we do not always analyze 10 years of data, but it's interesting to look at the last 3 or 5 years, see how behaviors changed before and after the pandemic, for example. Compare the perceptions of the different generations about a specific category. So for example, behind all these trending hashtags within hair color, mermaid hair, rainbow hair, etc., there's actually something really interesting about temporary hair color. And when we analyze these long-term conversations, we see that there's actually something really interesting happening around a younger segment of the population that is interested in short-term hair color. And to make it short, these consumers just want their hair to reflect their mood of the day. So they want to have fun with their hair and want vibrant colors to help them express who they are. They want to feel bold. And so if they feel depressed, they want a different color than if they are celebrating with their friends. So this is basically the difference between your reputation and social listening, I would say. So long answer short, there's a huge difference between a trending topic and durable consumer behaviors.
No, for sure. One thing that is also interesting now, with the tools we have available, we're obviously going through a financial crisis or tough times with inflation, cost of living, etc. The insights that we've previously haven't necessarily had this cost of living crisis impact on the different trends and insights that we're having. So it makes for an interesting space for us as researchers, doesn't it? So we're coming up with insights in a different context now.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also why we love to always put things into perspective, because when we analyze a category, let's say health supplements, it's also interesting to benchmark this category versus other categories. And so, for example, the financial crisis may really impact behaviors within skincare products, for example, and not as much when it comes to health supplements. It's also just one example, but we always try to benchmark different categories, because once again, the broader your perspective is, the more interesting it is usually.
Yeah, for sure. So another thing that's obviously, I think all of us are aware of what's going on in terms of content creation now. So there's a proportion of content in the data sources that platforms like Semantiweb analyze, which is now being generated by artificial intelligence. So people are using your chat GPTs and your bards, etc., of the worlds to produce content which is ending up on social media, on blogs, on forums, and possibly even on reviews as well. So now you're getting some tools analyzing data that is partially generated by AI as well. So I'd be interested to hear your perspective on generative AI content on social media and how tech platforms are responding to these.
So definitely this is something that's on our mind and a key challenge. And we're working on this. So far, we're quite confident in our ability to identify authentic content because consumers usually do not speak as well as bots or AIs. They make typos, they use abbreviations, etc., etc. But of course, AI tools are also becoming more and more specific and precise. So that's something we keep in mind. And definitely that's something like we need to work on. We're testing things, but that's also part of the industry, always making progress. And we also look at what's being done by some of our fellow market research companies in terms of quant or qual analysis.
So I guess you'd have possibly your primary post, say, on social media may have some generative AI content on it, but then the interaction of that, the comments, etc., the conversations that stem off it would largely be organic, wouldn't they, by human?
Yes, definitely. And just to add on your previous question, it's also a discussion that we need to have, or we need to look at what's being done on the actual platforms that host these comments. And it's something I know they work on. So typically like retailers like Amazon, like Walmart, Walgreens, websites such as Reddit also work on guaranteeing that their content is authentic. So we also rely on them, but on our end, we're also trying to have some tools to make sure we keep analyzing these authentic comments.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it's not necessarily to say that they're not authentic. So it could be someone that's using AI just to bulk out their answers, for instance. But yes, still, it's not necessarily nefarious. So.
No, you're right. And actually, in your example, that can be interesting to see how AI can help us have more detailed feedback as long as it's true to our clients' real lives.
That's right. It all makes a really interesting space. So it's cool to be involved in it all. So look, there is a move to being more commercial. So market researchers have long been encouraged to think about more of the business outcomes, etc. So be keen to hear examples of your work which you've been involved in, perhaps like quick wins or unexpected insights that they've come out and really helped a business succeed or the end consumer.
So there is an example of a quick win that I like to give to our clients because it shows that, once again, sometimes things are right ahead of us and are easy to fix. So this example comes from a few years ago. One of our clients, a leading skincare brand, had just launched a new 3-in-1 wipe. It was a cleansing wipe, and the product had been pre-tested and had done very well. The results went through the roof, so they were very confident the product would perform very well. But after a few weeks, the client called us and said, we do not really understand, and we don't have the time to analyze why this product is poorly rated on retailers' website. So they asked us to help them. So we collected the reviews for this product, and indeed there was a very high percentage of 1 and 2 stars reviews. Very high, especially compared to a new product launch. So we analyzed these negative reviews, and we actually quickly found out that the customers thought they had bought not a 3-in-1 product, but a 3-for-1. So they expected actually to receive 3 products at home, like as a promotional bundle. So of course they were disappointed to receive just 1 pack. So we didn't really understand why it wasn't clear for them. So we looked at the product description on a retailer's website, and at the time, the visual space online was quite small and the visual was a bit pixeled. So it was hard to actually see the 3-in-1, and it was easy to think it was a 3-for-1. So the client quickly changed the visual, and within just a few days, we saw a drastic change, and the product indeed was amazingly performant. So sometimes it's just like some aspect of the marketing mix that goes wrong, but it can impact the whole brand. So that's an example of like a thing that is right in front of us. And you also had a question of unexpected insight. So I've talked a lot about beauty. We also get to work on a lot of different industries, and that's something I love about my job, because we get being surprised across all these industries. So I actually have a lot of examples, but maybe one example I find interesting is we recently got to work on the prenatals category. So supplements for women who want to get pregnant. We expected consumers to be exclusively women for this type of products. But actually, we found out that we had a small portion, not a huge percentage, but still like somewhere around like 5% of consumers who were men who took prenatals. And so definitely we were very surprised. And when we analyzed those conversations, we actually realized that, yes, they took prenatals because there is no over-the-counter treatment for men who have weak hair or weak nails and just want to strengthen their hair or nails. And so they take prenatals because their doctors just tell them to do so, because it's the best product for like to have stronger hair or nail. So it's just like an example. Maybe if we have some time left, I like another example because it's from 5 or 6 years ago, so it's not new. Now it may seem obvious, but at the time it was quite unexpected. So we were analyzing for one of our clients the new eating behaviors of young adults compared to older users. So we analyzed millions of conversations, and our algorithms pull out the most frequently used keywords, as well as the most frequent combinations of keywords. So at some point, we went down that list and we saw the term broccoli or cauliflower that were being associated with toppings. So we thought, interesting. So we looked at the actual conversations, and at the time it was a low signal, but now it's something quite widespread. It turns out that consumers who did not like to eat a lot of veggies, but for health reasons had to, actually were testing new ways to eat more veggies, and some of them were just like using broccoli or cauliflowers as toppings on their milkshakes or smoothies. Or sometimes also they would use cauliflower or broccoli in their coffee just as a topping. So I remember at the time I was, that cannot be true. And we started to look, and now I still look at that trend, and now it seems like widespread once again. But 5 or 6 years ago, it was definitely a low signal. And yeah, once again, that's what's fascinating about our job and what I love.
If someone saw it on a TikTok video, I'll have to try that.
Well, definitely, if you look at like broccoli or cauliflower coffee on TikTok, you'll find a lot of super interesting DIY recipes.
Wow.
Bon appetit.
So if you're not on TikTok, you're missing out on a whole different world.
Yeah, definitely. And that's also something I like to say. And TikTok for me has been very humbling, because if you had asked me 4 or 5 years ago my thoughts about TikTok, I would have told you, well, this is just the next big thing, and soon it will be about brands, and brands. But I was totally wrong. TikTok is so interesting. There are so many interesting findings on TikTok. It's still a platform where brands are quite small. So it's all about genuine conversations taking place. And what's super interesting is to look at the dialogue going on between people who post videos and their followers. And so you get to identify the most frequently asked questions on a topic. Oh, I love your makeup, your look, your eyeliner looks on fleek. How do you do it? Or how do you apply eyeliner on an oily skin? You are able to identify so many questions, unexpected findings, unanswered pain points. So that's really a very valuable source for us.
Yeah, very true. So finally, what's your advice for people, for market researchers who want to stay relevant and up to date in this fast-paced industry and environment that we're working in?
Well, it's just my experience, but I've always thought that behind each successful marketing campaign, there's a very detailed brief that relies on a consumer insight that's quite unique and that opens the door to really differentiating campaigns or launches. But definitely for me, it's all about sharing a very specific brief about your goals, objectives, what you already know, and what is the consumer insight that can be used, leveraged to buy the campaign, to build the campaign.
No, that's good. So yeah, and the insight being key on businesses being able to have competitive advantages.
Definitely, yes.
Cool. So any final thoughts or words before we close, Pierre?
Well, Semantiweb's methodology relies on, new technologies, etc. And these new methodologies can be intimidating, like in terms of tools, methodologies, and that keep changing. So for marketers, this can be daunting, but I'm also very optimistic at heart. And so for me, these new technologies are an opportunity to provide more granular findings and also give a voice to more diverse profiles of consumers that actually were left aside by traditional methodologies. So definitely I understand these new methodologies such as social listening may be a bit intimidating, but as long as you have a clear brief in mind and keep your marketing goals in mind, actually we're here to help answer your question and achieve your goals. So it's just a question of like tools, but if the question is well phrased, social listening can definitely help you answer your questions.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And for the listeners out there too, as always, if you have liked what you've heard today, please feel free to review the podcast on whatever you're listening or viewing on. Subscribe to the podcast as well, or even share it with others who might also find this useful too. Until next time, thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.